Because his mistress had a miscarriage, her husband sent her to prison for 2 years. He visited every month, and she always refused to see him. The day she was released was the day he lost everything. If you think about leaving the story after reading the title, don't. I promise this will be the best story of your life. Don't miss Chapter 9. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories, your own family channel. May the Almighty wrap every woman in a protection so strong that no sorrow can break her, and bless her with a peace so deep it feels like heaven resting on her shoulders. May her heart be guarded with light, her steps guided by mercy, and her spirit lifted with a strength that can move mountains. Women are the quiet miracles of this world. They carry families, heal pain, and still give love without limits. I pray that every woman who hears this finds days filled with comfort, nights covered in calm, and a future overflowing with gentle blessings. May every wound turn into wisdom, every tear turn into strength, and every prayer she whispers be answered in ways more beautiful than she imagined. May her worth be honored, her kindness remembered, and her soul forever protected by God's loving hands. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Dominique Harris heard the word guilty and realized that the man she'd given 12 years to had just chosen his pregnant mistress over the truth, and there was nothing left in her chest where her heart used to be. The courtroom swam before her eyes. Judge Morrison's voice continued, mechanical and distant, something about sentencing guidelines and the severity of causing fetal death through assault. 2 years. The words landed like stones in water, disappearing into a depth Dominique couldn't measure. 730 days. She tried to count them, but her mind went blank. Her legs trembled beneath her pencil skirt, the navy one Jacob always said made her look professional and beautiful, the one he'd helped her pick out 3 years ago, standing outside the dressing room saying, "That's the one." She'd worn it today because some stupid part of her thought it mattered what she looked like when they declared her innocent. She'd even done her makeup carefully this morning, hands shaking as she applied mascara in the holding cell bathroom, wanting to look strong and composed for the cameras she'd assumed would capture her vindication. What a fool! Behind her, Simone gasped. A sound like someone had struck her. Her sister's hand reached forward, gripping Dominique's shoulder hard enough to bruise, nails digging through fabric, but Dominique couldn't feel it. She couldn't feel anything except the weight of Jacob's testimony, still hanging in the air like smoke after a fire, choking her, poisoning everything. "Your Honor, I have to be honest. Dominique became someone I didn't recognize after she found out about Anya and the baby. She was angry all the time, volatile, throwing things, screaming until 2 in the morning, saying things that frightened me. I was afraid of what she might do, genuinely afraid. Every word a lie, every syllable a betrayal so complete it defied comprehension. She'd sat there listening to him destroy her with fiction, her hands gripping the table edge until her knuckles went white, until she couldn't feel her fingers anymore, unable to recognize the man speaking as someone she'd ever known, ever loved, ever trusted with her life. She'd never thrown a single thing, never screamed for hours, had cried, yes, sobbed herself sick when she'd found out about the affair. But violent. The accusation was so absurd, it would have been laughable if it wasn't destroying her life. Liar, she'd thought with each word. Liar. The guard touched her elbow now, surprisingly gentle. "Ma'am, we need to stand." Dominique turned, her body moving without permission from her brain, and looked across the courtroom to where Jacob sat in the gallery. He was crying, tears streaming down his face, his shoulders shaking, his hands covering his mouth like he was trying to hold back screams. His eyes met hers for one terrible moment, and in them she saw guilt. Not remorse for lying. Guilt that he'd been caught in the affair. Guilt so heavy he'd sacrificed her to lighten it. Good, she thought, and the coldness of that single word terrified her more than the verdict. She wanted to feel rage, wanted to feel betrayal sharp enough to cut. But there was only this vast emptiness, this sense of unreality, like she was watching someone else's life collapse in real time. The walk to the side exit seemed endless. Each step echoed. Simone was saying something behind her, her voice high and desperate, arguing with someone, probably their court-appointed lawyer who'd been outmatched from the start by Anya Joy's legal team. Jacob's legal team, really, because he'd paid for everything. Had liquidated their savings, the account they'd built together over 12 years to hire attorneys for his mistress, to help destroy his wife. Their father appeared beside her suddenly. When had he arrived? She hadn't seen him during the trial. He was shouting something at Jacob across the courtroom, his face red with rage. Security was moving between them. The judge was calling for order, and Anya Joy sat behind the prosecution table, perfectly still. When Dominique's eyes found her, the woman looked sad, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue like she was the victim here, like she hadn't just sent an innocent woman to prison with lies. 3 months ago, Dominique had been a high school counselor with a mortgage and a herb garden, and a husband who kissed her forehead every morning before work. She'd had students who trusted her with their secrets, their pain, their futures, colleagues who respected her, a principal who'd called her the heart of their guidance department. 3 months ago, her biggest worry was whether they should finally start trying for a baby or wait another year. Jacob had wanted to wait. Now she understood why. Hard to start a family with your wife when you're already starting one with your mistress. She'd been planning their anniversary trip to Costa Rica, had bookmarked hotels, started a Pinterest board of restaurants and hiking trails, had imagined them remembering why they'd fallen in love. 3 months ago, her biggest problem had been that Jacob seemed distant, working late, coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers, making excuses about crowded elevators. She'd thought he was stressed about work, about his father's health. She'd tried to help, made his favorite meals, rubbed his shoulders, suggested counseling. What a fool she'd been. Then Anya called her phone at midnight, drunk and vicious. "He loves me. I'm having his baby. You're just the wife he's too guilty to leave. You're nothing but an obligation he's been trying to escape." Dominique had driven to Jacob's office in her pajamas, not even conscious of making the decision to go. She'd confronted him in the parking lot at 1 in the morning under fluorescent security lights. He'd admitted everything without even trying to lie. Maybe he was relieved. 7 months of affair. Anya was 12 weeks pregnant. He'd known for a month. He was sorry, so sorry. He didn't know how it happened. It just started and he couldn't stop it. He'd end it. He'd fix this. Please, please forgive him. She'd stood there in her pajamas and bare feet and felt absolutely nothing. Then she'd packed a bag, driven to Simone's at 3 in the morning, collapsed sobbing on her sister's couch, unable to form words. She'd stayed there for 2 weeks while Jacob called and texted and showed up crying, sending flowers to her school, 37 bouquets over 10 days until her colleagues started making jokes, leaving notes on her car, showing up at Simone's building until the doorman threatened to call police. She'd almost given him one, almost agreed to meet him for coffee, to talk, to see if 12 years of marriage was worth fighting for despite the devastation, despite the betrayal, despite everything. That was the day the police came to her school and arrested her in front of her students. Anya claimed Dominique had come to her apartment the night before, that they'd argued at the top of the stairs, that Dominique had pushed her and she'd fallen and the baby was gone and it was all Dominique's fault. Except Dominique had been at Simone's apartment that entire evening, watching reality TV and eating ice cream and trying to figure out if 12 years of marriage was worth fighting for. Simone had testified to that, had shown phone records, time-stamped photos, everything. But Anya had been more convincing, had stood in that witness box with tears streaming down her face, one hand on her flat stomach, describing in vivid detail how Dominique had looked at her with pure hatred and said, "If I can't have him, you can't have his baby." Words Dominique had never spoken, a confrontation that had never happened, a crime she hadn't committed. And Jacob had testified that yes, Dominique had been unstable, angry, acting erratically. He'd painted her as dangerous, unhinged, capable of violence. The jury had deliberated for 6 hours. "Ms. Harris," the guard's voice cut through her thoughts. They were in a small holding room now. Simone was there, and their father, When had he arrived? And both of them were crying. "We need to process you." Dominique nodded, held out her wrists for the handcuffs. The metal was cold, final. "Dominique." Her father's voice broke. He'd been absent for most of her childhood, came back into her life only 5 years ago, still trying to make up for lost time. "Baby girl, we're going to appeal. We're going to fix this." She looked at him, looked at Simone, both of them staring at her like she was made of glass and might shatter. "He testified against me," Dominique said quietly. "Jacob stood up there and called me dangerous. After 12 years, after everything." "He's a coward," Simone spat. "He's a lying, cheating coward, and I hope he rots." The guard cleared his throat. "We need to go." Dominique stood. Simone grabbed her hand, held tight. "I'm going to visit every week, every single week, and we're going to fight this." Dominique wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that truth mattered, that justice would eventually come, that the system would recognize this nightmare for what it was. But she'd just been convicted of killing a baby that she'd never touched by testimony from a woman she'd never confronted, while her husband corroborated lies that destroyed her. As they led her through the corridor toward the transport van, she heard Jacob's voice echoing from somewhere behind them. "Dominique, please, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge him, just kept walking, the chains between her ankles rattling with each step. In the van, alone in the metal cage, Dominique closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to believe in love. Tried to remember the Jacob who'd proposed on a beach at sunset, who'd held her through her mother's cancer scare, who'd slow danced with her in their kitchen at midnight just because a song came on the radio. That man was gone. Maybe he'd never existed. Maybe she'd loved a ghost for 12 years and was only now seeing the truth. Or maybe good people could do terrible things when they were scared and guilty and being manipulated by someone who knew exactly which strings to pull. She didn't know which possibility was worse. The van started moving. Through the small window, Dominique caught a glimpse of the courthouse steps. Jacob was there, collapsed against the railing, his face buried in his hands. She watched until the building disappeared from view. Then she turned to face forward, toward whatever was coming next, and made herself a promise in the darkness. She would survive this. She would survive him, and somehow, some way, he would understand the magnitude of what he'd destroyed. The woman who'd loved Jacob Mescal died in that courtroom. What walked into the prison was something else entirely. Chapter 2. The Truth in Cell Block D. 37 days into her sentence, Dominique Harris learned that the truth wasn't going to set her free, but it was going to burn down everything Jacob Mescal had left. The first month had been hell in ways Dominique hadn't imagined. Not just the violence or the noise or the dehumanizing strip searches, though those were their own nightmare. Not the loss of privacy, the constant surveillance, the way guards looked through her like she was already less than human. The worst part was the nights, the endless, suffocating nights when the lights went out and there was nothing between Dominique and her thoughts except thin mattress and thinner hope. The darkness pressed down like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe, impossible to escape the loop of questions that had no answers. She cried every night for the first 2 weeks, silent, body-shaking sobs that left her exhausted and raw by morning. Her cellmate, Rosa, had ignored it at first, giving her space and privacy in a place where neither existed. But on the 15th night, when Dominique couldn't catch her breath, when panic seized her throat and she thought she might actually die right there on her bunk, Rosa had climbed down from the top bunk and sat beside her. "Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Hold for 4. Dominique had followed the instructions, gasping and choking until her lungs remembered how to work. "I'm a nurse," Rosa had said quietly, settling back on her own bunk. "Former nurse, medical fraud, long story, but I know a panic attack when I see one." After that, they'd talked. Small things at first. Rosa's daughter who was being raised by her mother while Rosa served her time. Dominique's job at the high school where she'd counseled kids through their own traumas, the weather outside that they could only glimpse through high-barred windows, the terrible food that somehow managed to be both tasteless and offensive. Then bigger things. Rosa's abusive ex-husband who'd manipulated her into falsifying medical records to help his drug-dealing operation, who'd threatened to take their daughter if she didn't comply. Dominique's case. The trial that felt like a fever dream. Jacob's betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. Wait. Rosa had sat up straighter during one of these conversations, her dark eyes sharp with focus. This woman claimed she miscarried after you pushed her. Where was she treated? I don't know, it wasn't mentioned in the trial. What hospital? What doctor? There had to be medical records. Dominique frowned, trying to remember the details of testimony that had felt like knives. She said she went to a clinic, somewhere in the city, but her lawyer presented the medical evidence, discharge papers, examination notes. It was all there. From what clinic? I don't remember the name. Rosa had gone quiet then, thoughtful in a way that made Dominique nervous. That's strange. Any hospital or clinic treating a miscarriage, especially one allegedly caused by trauma, would have reported it. There should have been a police report filed from the medical facility. Was there? Dominique's heart had started beating faster. The police report came from Anya. She reported the assault to police directly. After she was treated. The next day, I think. Rosa had shaken her head slowly. That's not how it works. Medical professionals are mandatory reporters for suspected abuse and assault. If she told the clinic staff that someone pushed her and caused her miscarriage, they would have called police immediately. She wouldn't have had to report it herself the next day. The seed of doubt had taken root then, growing through the cracks in Dominique's grief. Now, 5 weeks later, that seed had become something else entirely. Rosa had connections. Women cycled through the prison constantly, and Rosa had been here long enough to know everyone. She'd put out quiet inquiries, asking women who were being released to check on something if they could, to ask around at the women's clinic on 5th Street. This morning, during breakfast, a woman named Keisha had approached their table. "You, Rosa? That's me?" Keisha had glanced around nervously, then leaned in. "My sister works at the women's clinic. She remembers treating Anya Joy, says the file is flagged." "Flagged how?" "For inconsistencies. The woman came in saying she'd fallen downstairs at home, alone. No mention of being pushed. But she was asking weird questions about how long fetal tissue would be detectable, whether they would test it without her permission. The doctor noted that her demeanor was anxious and evasive, and that her story changed multiple times." Dominique's hands had started shaking so badly she'd dropped her plastic fork. "There's more," Keisha had continued, her voice dropping even lower. "My sister remembers because this same woman had been in the week before for a consultation about ending the pregnancy. She asked specific questions about medication abortion, wanted to know how it would look, whether it would seem like a natural miscarriage, how long the tissue would be detectable. My sister got bad vibes, made detailed notes in the file about patients seeming inappropriately focused on concealment of voluntary termination and demonstrating concerning premeditation regarding appearance of spontaneous loss. She didn't think much of it at the time, but when she saw the news about your trial, about a woman being convicted of causing a miscarriage, it all clicked. She tried to come forward. The cafeteria had tilted around Dominique. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright suddenly, burning her eyes. Rosa had gripped her arm hard, steadying her, keeping her upright when her body wanted to collapse. "Why didn't your sister come forward?" Rosa had asked. "She tried. Called the public defender's office, left 2 messages. No one called her back." Keisha had shrugged. "Overworked, overwhelmed. Your lawyer probably got 100 tips and couldn't follow up on all of them. But the information's in the file. Medical records from both visits. If someone subpoenaed them..." Now, hours later, Dominique sat in the small library room where inmates could meet with legal counsel. Rosa had helped her draft a letter to her previous attorney, explaining what they'd learned. But Dominique's hands wouldn't stop shaking enough to write clearly. "I don't understand," she whispered. "If she wanted an abortion, why blame me? Why go through all of this?" "Control," Rosa said simply. "Think about it. She was having an affair with a married man who wouldn't leave his wife. Then she gets pregnant. Maybe it was your husband's, maybe it wasn't. Either way, she realizes this baby isn't giving her what she wants. He's not proposing. He's guilty and confused, but he's not leaving you. So she ends the pregnancy and uses it as a weapon, makes him think you killed his child, binds him to her through guilt, makes him testify against you to prove his loyalty to her." The analysis was so cold, so calculating that Dominique's stomach turned. "People do terrible things when they're desperate," Rosa continued, "and desperate people trying to trap someone, they're capable of anything." Dominique looked down at the half-written letter. Her handwriting was barely legible through the trembling. "Even if this is true," she said slowly, "even if we can prove she lied, it doesn't change what Jacob did. He still testified against me. He still believed her over me. He still stood in that courtroom and called me dangerous. I know, honey. I gave him 12 years. I was faithful and supportive, and I loved him with everything I had, and when it mattered most, he chose her lies over my truth." Rosa didn't respond. There was nothing to say. After a long moment, Dominique picked up the pen again, steadied her hand through sheer force of will, started writing. "I'm not doing this to get out early," she said as she wrote. "I'm doing this because I need him to know what he did. I need him to understand that he didn't just send an innocent woman to prison. He sent his wife, the woman who loved him more than anything, here based on lies from a woman who killed her own baby to manipulate him. And then I'm going to make sure he lives with that knowledge every single day for the rest of his life." Rosa nodded slowly. "You've changed, you know, since you got here, in just these few weeks." "I know. You're harder, colder, more focused." Dominique finished the letter, signed her name with hands that had finally stopped shaking, looked up at Rosa with eyes that had learned to see clearly in the dark, that had adjusted to this new reality where trust was currency and weakness was death. "Good," she said. "Soft women don't survive in cages, and I'm planning to do more than survive." That night, after lights out, Dominique lay in her bunk and thought about Jacob. Wondered if he was sleeping peacefully in their bed. No, in Anya's bed now, because that woman had surely moved into the house Dominique had helped furnish, had chosen paint colors for, had called home. Wondered if Anya was redecorating already, erasing every trace of Dominique's existence. She wondered if he thought about her, if guilt kept him awake the way rage kept her awake. If he'd tried to visit again after she'd refused the first 3 times, sitting in that visiting room like a penitent at confession. Part of her, a small, dying part that was shrinking every day, still loved him, still remembered every good moment, every laugh, every promise made under stars and in morning light. That part whispered that maybe he'd been manipulated too, that maybe he was a victim of Anya's lies just like she was, that maybe he deserved a chance to explain. But the larger part, the part that was learning to breathe in this concrete tomb, the part that was growing stronger with each passing day, knew better. Jacob had made a choice. When it came down to protecting his mistress or trusting his wife, he'd chosen wrong. He'd destroyed Dominique to absolve himself of guilt for the affair. He'd burned down 12 years of marriage to avoid facing what he'd done. He'd looked a jury in the eyes and lied about the woman he'd promised to love and protect. That wasn't manipulation, that was cowardice, that was weakness, that was a man so afraid of his own guilt that he'd sacrifice another human being to escape it. And cowards, Dominique was learning, deserved exactly what was coming to them. She closed her eyes and began planning. The woman who'd loved Jacob Mescal was dying a little more each day. The woman who was taking her place. That woman knew how to wait, how to plan, how to strike when the time was right. And the time was coming. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Pain. 3 months in, and Dominique Harris stopped crying at night, not because the pain went away, but because she learned how to forge it into something sharp enough to cut. The transformation happened slowly, then all at once. It started with small acts of will, getting out of bed when every muscle ached, eating when food tasted like ash, breathing when her lungs felt too tight. Dominique started waking at 5 every morning, before the wake-up call, to exercise in the small space beside her bunk. Push-ups until her arms shook, squats until her legs burned, planks until her core felt like fire. Rosa watched silently from the top bunk, occasionally offering corrections to her form. "You're going to hurt yourself doing it like that." "I don't care." "You should. Pain is fine. Injury is stupid." So Dominique adjusted her form and kept going. By the end of the first month of this routine, she could do 50 push-ups without stopping. By the end of the second, she'd added a pull-up bar that had been installed in the recreation yard. Other inmates started noticing, started asking if she was training for something. "Yes," she'd answer, "freedom." But it wasn't just physical training. Dominique spent hours in the prison library, reading everything she could find on psychology, human behavior, manipulation tactics. She checked out books on legal procedures and appeals processes. She read memoirs of exonerated prisoners, studied how they'd fought back, what strategies had worked. At night, when she couldn't sleep, she wrote in a notebook Simone had brought during visits. Lists, names, details, everything she could remember about Jacob's life that might be useful. His business partner Devon, his parents, his habits, his fears, his weaknesses. "You're building a case," Rosa observed one evening, watching Dominique fill another page with precise handwriting. "I'm building a weapon." Rosa didn't question it. In prison, you learned quickly that survival took many forms. Simone visited every week, exactly as promised. She came on Saturdays, always bringing photos of their mother, updates on the outside world, and increasingly detailed reports on Jacob's life. "He looks terrible," Simone had said during the second month. "Like he's aged 10 years. He showed up at Mom's church last Sunday." Dominique's pen had stopped moving across the page of her notebook. "What did Mom do?" "Walked right past him. Didn't say a word. He tried to approach her after the service, and Aunt Carol told him if he didn't leave, she'd call the police for harassment." Good, Dominique had thought, but didn't say. Her mother's cancer had been in remission for 3 years, but the stress of Dominique's conviction had brought back her health anxiety. She was in and out of doctor's appointments, and every time Simone visited, Dominique could see the worry lines deepening around her sister's eyes. "There's something else," Simone had continued. "That woman moved into your house." The words had landed like a punch. Dominique's house. The home she and Jacob had bought together, had painted and furnished, had made love in, had planned a future in. Anya Joy was living there now, sleeping in Dominique's bed, walking through rooms that still held Dominique's fingerprints on every surface. "Tell me," Dominique had said quietly. "She's redecorating, expensive stuff. Devon's wife mentioned it. Jacob's been acting weird at work, distant, and Devon is worried about some financial irregularities. Small things, but enough to make him nervous. Jacob's been moving money around, and Devon thinks it's to cover her spending." Dominique had absorbed this information, filed it away. "What else?" "She's mean to him. I saw them at the grocery store last week. I was following them like you asked, and she was just vicious, criticizing everything he picked out, snapping at him when he suggested something different. He looked miserable." "Does he try to visit me?" Simone had hesitated. "Every other week, like clockwork. He brings flowers. Sometimes the wedding album. Last time he brought a letter, but they wouldn't let him give it to you since you have him on your no-contact list." Dominique had nodded, felt nothing. The mention of the wedding album should have hurt, but she was learning to feel pain differently now, to observe it from a distance, clinical and cold, instead of letting it consume her. Now, a month later, she was sitting in the common room during recreation time, helping a young inmate named Maria draft a letter to her parole board. Maria was 19, serving time for drug possession, terrified and broken. Dominique had taken her under her wing the way Rosa had done for her. You need to emphasize rehabilitation, Dominique explained, pointing to a section of Maria's draft. Talk about the classes you've taken, the progress you've made. They want to see growth, not just regret. How do you know all this? I read a lot. Maria studied her with wide eyes. You're different from the others. You talk like a teacher. I was a counselor, high school. What did you do to end up here? I didn't do anything, that's why I'm here. Maria didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. After she left, Rosa slid into the chair beside Dominique. You're building an army, she observed, creating something powerful. What? These women. You help them, and they're loyal to you now. Maria would walk through fire for you, so would half a dozen others I've seen you counsel. You're creating a network. Dominique hadn't thought about it that way, but Rosa was right. Over the past months, she'd helped a dozen women with various problems: legal letters, conflict resolution, emotional support. In a place where kindness was currency, Dominique was becoming wealthy. Maybe I am, she said finally. Smart. You're going to need allies for whatever you're planning. That night, after lights out, Dominique lay in her bunk thinking about Jacob. Simone had reported that he'd tried to visit again this weekend, had sat in the visiting room for 2 hours, waiting, before finally accepting that Dominique wasn't coming. She wondered what he looked like now, whether he really had aged as much as Simone claimed, whether he was losing sleep, losing weight, losing his mind. Part of her wanted to see him, wanted to look him in the eye and ask him why he'd believed Anya over her, why he'd testified against her, why 12 years of marriage meant so little in the face of 7 months of affair. But the stronger part of her knew that seeing him would accomplish nothing except reopening wounds that were finally starting to scar over. Rosa, she whispered into the darkness. Yeah? What if I never stop loving him? What if I destroy him and it destroys me too? There was a long pause. Then Rosa's voice, soft but firm. Then you destroy him anyway, because he didn't just betray you. He erased you, made you invisible, convinced a courtroom full of people that you were someone you're not. You have to exist again, and if that means burning down everything he built, so be it. Dominique closed her eyes, thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, soft, hopeful, believing in fairness and truth and love conquering all. That woman had walked into a courtroom expecting justice and walked out in chains. That woman was dead. The woman in this bunk was something else, something harder, something that knew how to plan and wait and strike when the time was right. Tomorrow, Simone would visit again, and Dominique would give her new instructions. Small things, surveillance, documentation, building a case that had nothing to do with courts and everything to do with justice of a different kind. Jacob Mescal thought the worst was behind him. Thought he'd survived the guilt, made his choices, and was moving forward with his new life. He had no idea that his real punishment hadn't even begun. Chapter 4. The first cut. 6 months in, Dominique Harris made her first move, and it wasn't revenge yet, it was surgery, cutting out the infection before it killed what was left of her soul. The nightmares were getting worse. Almost every night now, Dominique found herself back in the courtroom, watching Jacob take the stand. The war wasn't just against Jacob anymore. It was against the part of herself that still wanted to believe he'd been a good man who made terrible choices. In the dreams, his testimony was more vicious than reality. He called her crazy, violent, unfit to be a wife, called her a monster. And Anya sat beside him, her hand on his arm, smiling that victorious smile. Dominique would wake gasping, her t-shirt soaked with sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs. Rosa had stopped asking if she was okay. The answer was always the same. But today was different. Today, Dominique had a plan. She was sitting in the common room during afternoon recreation, ostensibly reading a library book about cognitive behavioral therapy. In reality, she was watching the security guard by the phone bank. The guard was new, young, hadn't yet learned to ignore inmates' personal drama. When the guard stepped away to handle a conflict between two women arguing over the TV remote, Dominique moved quickly. She approached Maria, who was waiting for her turn at the phone. "I need a favor," Dominique said quietly. "Anything. When you get out next month, I need you to deliver something for me." Maria's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "What is it?" "A photograph. My sister will give it to you. You just need to mail it from an address that can't be traced back to me." "That's it?" "That's it." Maria agreed without hesitation. Dominique had helped her so much over the past months, editing her parole letter, teaching her coping strategies for her anxiety, intervening when another inmate tried to intimidate her. This was an easy favor to return. When Simone visited on Saturday, Dominique explained the plan. "You want me to give Maria our wedding photo to mail to Jacob?" Simone looked confused. "No note, no return address, just the photo." "Why?" "Because he needs to remember what he destroyed. He's living in our house with that woman, redecorating our life, and I need him to see what he had, what he threw away." Simone studied her sister's face. "You've changed." "I know. You're colder, harder. I have to be." "No, you don't. You could let this go. Focus on your appeal, on getting out, on moving forward." Dominique leaned forward, her voice dropping low. "He testified against me, Simone. Stood up in court and told lies that put me in a cage. I wake up every night drowning in nightmares about it. I can't eat without feeling sick. I can't let anyone touch me without flinching. He did this to me, and I need him to feel even a fraction of what I feel." Simone's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared for you." "Don't be. I'm going to survive this. But he needs to know that his actions have consequences." After Simone left, Dominique returned to her cell and lay on her bunk, staring at the underside of Rosa's mattress above her. She thought about Jacob opening the envelope, pulling out their wedding photo, both of them laughing on the beach, her in white, him in a linen suit, the sunset painting everything gold. She thought about him breaking down, because he would. She knew him well enough to know that. The idea should have brought satisfaction. Instead, it just made her feel empty. "You okay down there?" Rosa asked from above. "No," Dominique admitted, "but I will be." 3 weeks later, during Simone's next visit, her sister's eyes were bright with something between concern and triumph. "It worked," Simone said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Devon's wife told me Jacob lost it, completely fell apart at his office, locked himself in and wouldn't come out for hours. Devon had to cancel meetings." Dominique absorbed this information, waited for the rush of victory, the satisfaction of knowing her calculated cruelty had landed exactly as intended. It didn't come, just a hollow ache where triumph should have been. "There's more," Simone continued. "He tried to visit you again yesterday, brought the photo with him. Security said he was pressing it against the glass, crying, begging them to get you. What did you tell security to do?" "Exactly what you said. I told them to give him a message. She says you're already dead to her." Dominique closed her eyes. Saw Jacob in her mind, destroyed, broken, finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd done. "Good," she told herself. "This is good. He deserves this." But that night, after the message had been delivered and Jacob had presumably received it, Dominique vomited in the toilet until there was nothing left. Rosa held her hair back, didn't ask questions, just stayed with her until the shaking stopped. "It doesn't feel how I thought it would," Dominique whispered, her forehead resting against the cool porcelain. "It never does. I wanted him to hurt, and he is. But it's not making me feel better." Rosa helped her stand, guided her back to the bunk. "That's because revenge doesn't heal wounds, it just creates new ones." "Then why am I doing this?" "Because you need to. Because he needs to understand what he destroyed. But don't confuse that with healing. Healing comes later, if you let it." Dominique lay in her bunk that night, thinking about Maria, who would be released in 3 days, thinking about Jacob opening that envelope, thinking about him pressing their wedding photo against the visiting room glass, desperate for her to see him, to forgive him. She thought about the woman she'd been in that photo, young, hopeful, so in love it radiated from every pixel. That woman had believed in forever, had believed that love could survive anything. She'd been a fool. But maybe Jacob had been a fool too. A different kind, the kind who believed that a pregnant mistress's tears were more real than a wife's truth, the kind who chose guilt over loyalty, the kind who could be manipulated into destroying everything that mattered. Did that make him evil or just weak? Dominique didn't know anymore, and she was too tired to figure it out. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, knowing the nightmares would come but too exhausted to fight them. In the dreams, Jacob was always crying, always begging, always too late. When she woke in the morning, her pillow was wet. She didn't know if the tears were his or hers. Chapter 5. The Unraveling. 9 months in, and Dominique Harris watched from inside prison walls as Jacob Mescal's life began to collapse. Not because she was pulling strings yet, but because guilt is a slow poison that eventually stops the heart. The change in season outside meant nothing in here, where every day was identical. But Dominique could feel time passing in the weight of accumulated days, in the way her body had hardened and her heart had followed. 273 mornings of waking up in a cage, 273 nights of nightmares, 273 days of becoming someone she didn't recognize. She was stronger now, could do 100 push-ups without stopping, could pull herself up on the recreation yard bar 20 times in a row. Her body had become something hard and efficient, all soft edges carved away by routine and rage. But the real changes weren't physical. "Your sister's here," the guard called during Saturday morning rec time. Dominique followed the guard to the visiting room, where Simone sat looking exhausted and worried. The moment Dominique sat down across from her, separated by reinforced glass, she knew something had changed. "Mom's sick," Simone said without preamble. Dominique's carefully constructed calm cracked. "How sick?" "She collapsed at church last Sunday. They ran tests. The cancer's back. Aggressive this time." The visiting room continued around them. Other inmates talking to their families, crying, laughing, living through these small windows of connection. But Dominique couldn't hear any of it over the roaring in her ears. How long? They don't know. Could be months. Could be years if the treatment works. But Dominique, she's asking for you. She wants to see you before she starts chemo. "File for compassionate release," Dominique said immediately. "There's a provision for—" "I already did. 3 weeks ago, when we first got the diagnosis. They denied it." The world tilted. Dominique gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "On what grounds?" "Flight risk. History of violence." Simone's voice broke. "They're using your conviction against you, saying you haven't served enough time to be trusted." For a woman who'd never been violent in her life, who'd dedicated her career to helping troubled teenagers find their way, who'd been convicted based on lies and manipulation and a husband's cowardice. "There's something else," Simone continued. "Jacob's falling apart. Devon called me. He's worried about Jacob's mental state, says he's drinking heavily, missing work, making mistakes that are costing them clients. Anya's gotten worse too. She's controlling everything now, his phone, his money, his schedule. Devon says she's destroying him." Good, Dominique thought automatically, then felt sick with herself for thinking it. "Devon wants to know if you'd be willing to see Jacob. He thinks maybe if you talked to him, gave him some kind of closure." "No." "Dominique. He doesn't get closure. He doesn't get peace. He gets exactly what he deserves." Simone flinched at the coldness in her voice. "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry," Dominique interrupted. "Angry is what you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic. What I feel is so far beyond anger that there isn't even a word for it. He destroyed me, Simone, put me in a cage based on lies, and now Mom is dying and I can't see her because I'm a flight risk. I know. No, you don't. You can't." Dominique's hands were shaking now, pressed flat against the counter. "You go home at night. You see Mom whenever you want. You have your freedom. I have nothing. And Jacob gets to walk around free while I'm trapped in here paying for crimes I didn't commit." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Simone reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "Rosa asked me to bring you this, said you'd know what to do with it." Dominique took the folder. Inside was documentation, Keisha's signed statement about witnessing Anya at the clinic, about overhearing her conversation, about seeing her take the pills. There were also photocopied medical records that Rosa's contacts had somehow obtained, showing Anya's visits to the clinic both before and after the miscarriage, the evidence that could free her. Dominique stared at the papers, thought about filing an appeal, about getting out, about seeing her mother before it was too late. Then she thought about Jacob, about him walking free while she'd rotted in here for 9 months, about him living in their house with the woman who'd destroyed both their lives, about him getting to feel guilty and tragic while Dominique lost everything. "I'm not filing yet," she said quietly. "What? Why?" "Because I need him to suffer more first. Dominique, Mom is dying." "I know." The words came out broken. "I know, and it's killing me. But if I file now, if I get out on appeal, Jacob gets to be the victim. He gets to say he was manipulated too, that he didn't know, that he's sorry. He gets redemption. So I don't want him redeemed. I want him destroyed." Simone stared at her like she was looking at a stranger. "What happened to you in here?" Dominique met her sister's eyes. "I learned that nice women finish last, that believing in justice and fairness and truth gets you locked in a cage while liars walk free, that the only person you can trust is yourself. That's not true, isn't it? Where was justice when I was convicted? Where was fairness when they denied my compassionate release? Where's the truth in a system that believed Anya Joy's lies over 12 years of my spotless reputation?" Simone had no answer. "I'll file the appeal," Dominique said finally. "But not yet. First, I'm going to make sure Anya Joy faces consequences for what she did, and I'm going to make sure Jacob Mescal understands exactly what he destroyed." That night, Dominique lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Rosa had gone to the common room for evening rec, leaving Dominique alone with her thoughts. She thought about her mother, about not being there for the chemo treatments, the doctor visits, the fear, about missing what might be her mother's last months because she was too consumed with revenge to take the out that had been offered. Was she becoming a monster? Was this what injustice did to people, twisted them into something cruel and hard? Or was she finally just protecting herself, learning to fight back in a world that had shown her repeatedly that being good and kind and trusting got you destroyed? She didn't know anymore. Around midnight, a guard came to the cell. "Harris, you have a visitor. It's after hours. Emergency petition, your lawyer's here." Dominique followed the guard to a small consultation room, but it wasn't her public defender waiting. It was a woman in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase, looking very out of place in the harsh, fluorescent lighting. "Ms. Harris, my name is Patricia Okafor. I specialize in wrongful conviction cases. Your former cellmate, Keisha, contacted me about your case. I've reviewed the evidence, and I believe we have grounds for immediate appeal." Dominique sat down slowly. "How did you get in here at this hour?" "I have connections, and your case has certain compelling elements that make it time-sensitive." "What does that mean?" Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out more documents. "It means that Anya Joy is currently under investigation by the State Medical Board for pharmacy theft. One of the clinics she visited has reported missing controlled substances around the time of her visits. If we move quickly, we can potentially get her testimony thrown out entirely, which would collapse your conviction." Hope flickered in Dominique's chest, painful and unwelcome. "Why are you here? I can't afford you." "I'm working pro bono. Your case has gained some attention in legal circles, wrongful conviction, perjured testimony, potential evidence tampering. It's exactly the kind of case that makes careers, and more importantly, it's the kind of injustice I became a lawyer to fight." Dominique studied the woman across from her. Patricia was younger than she'd first appeared, probably early 30s, with kind eyes and determined jaw. "If you take my case," Dominique said slowly, "can you guarantee I'll be out before my mother dies?" Patricia's expression softened. "I can guarantee I'll fight like hell, but the system moves slowly, even with compelling evidence. Then here's what I need you to do instead." Dominique leaned forward and began outlining her plan. Not for freedom, not yet, for something more important. Justice. Chapter 6. The Revelation. With 1 year served and her mother dying outside these walls, Dominique Harris stopped playing defense and became the hunter, and Anya Joy became the prey. Patricia Okafor was everything a lawyer should be, thorough, strategic, and absolutely ruthless when the situation demanded it. Over the next month, she visited Dominique 4 times, each visit bringing new information, new evidence, new possibilities. "The medical board investigation into Anya is moving faster than expected," Patricia explained during their 3rd meeting. "Apparently, she's been on their radar for years. Multiple clinics reported concerns about her behavior, her questions, her attempts to access medications. When Keisha's testimony connected her to your case, it opened up an entire investigation." Dominique absorbed this information calmly, though inside she felt like screaming. "What kind of medications?" "Misoprostol, primarily, used to induce abortion, but also anxiety medications, pain pills. Pattern suggests someone with severe pharmaceutical dependence and manipulation issues." "So the baby—" "There was definitely a pregnancy. Medical records confirm that. But the evidence strongly suggests Anya terminated it herself, then staged the assault to frame you and bind your husband to her through guilt." The room felt too small suddenly. Dominique closed her eyes, tried to breathe through the rage. A real baby, a real life ended. And Anya had killed it deliberately, had used that death as a weapon, had destroyed multiple lives in the process. "Can we prove it?" Dominique asked. "We can strongly suggest it. And more importantly, we can prove she perjured herself in your trial. That alone is grounds for immediate appeal." "I want you to do something else first." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I want you to contact Anya's lawyer. Tell them we have evidence of perjury and pharmaceutical theft. Give them enough detail to terrify her, but don't file anything officially yet." "Why would we do that?" "Because I want her to know it's coming. I want her to panic. I want her to feel the walls closing in the way I have for the past year." Patricia studied her carefully. "That's a risky strategy. If she runs, she won't run. She's too arrogant. She thinks she's smarter than everyone else. But she'll lash out, and when she does, she'll reveal herself." Patricia considered this. "You're talking about psychological warfare." "I'm talking about justice." After a long moment, Patricia nodded. "I'll draft the letter." The letter was sent on a Monday morning. By Monday evening, according to Simone's surveillance reports, Anya had received it. The fallout was spectacular. "She completely lost it," Simone reported during her next visit, her eyes wide. "Devon's wife said the neighbors heard her screaming. She was throwing things, breaking furniture. Jacob tried to calm her down and she hit him, actually hit him across the face." Dominique felt nothing, no satisfaction, no triumph, just cold observation. "What did Jacob do?" "Stood there and took it. Then tried to ask her what was in the letter. She wouldn't tell him at first, just kept screaming about how it was all his fault, how he should have taken care of this months ago." "Taken care of what?" "That's what he asked. And Dominique—" Simone leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She told him everything, about the pills, about ending the pregnancy deliberately, about framing you because you wouldn't have left otherwise." Dominique's hands clenched into fists. "He knows. He knows. Devon's wife said Jacob left the house at 2 in the morning and didn't come back for 3 days. When he finally came home, he looked like a ghost. Wouldn't speak to Anya. Wouldn't speak to anyone." Dominique tried to imagine it. Jacob learning the truth, realizing what he'd done, understanding that he'd testified against his innocent wife, had sent her to prison, had destroyed her life, all for a woman who'd been lying from the beginning. The baby wasn't even his, Anya had screamed during her breakdown. She'd been sleeping with someone else, didn't know whose it was, killed it because she couldn't be sure. That revelation should have brought satisfaction. Instead, Dominique felt only exhaustion. "There's more," Simone continued. "Jacob tried to come see you yesterday. The guard said he was almost hysterical, begging to see you, saying he had to explain, had to apologize. He had a written statement with him, some kind of confession about his testimony. Did you tell them to let him in?" "Of course not. You have him on permanent ban." "Good." Simone studied her sister's face. "Dominique, he knows the truth now. He knows you were innocent. That has to count for something." "It counts for nothing. He should have known from the beginning. He should have trusted me. Instead, he believed her lies and helped put me in a cage." Dominique's voice was flat, empty of emotion. "Knowing the truth now doesn't undo what he did. It just makes it worse." That night, Rosa brought news from the prison grapevine. One of the newer inmates had access to a smuggled phone and had looked up news articles about Dominique's case. The story was starting to leak. Investigative journalists were picking it up. Questions were being raised about the original trial, about Anya's testimony, about potential wrongful conviction. "You're going to be famous," Rosa said. "The innocent woman imprisoned by her husband's lies. It's the kind of story that sells newspapers." "I don't want to be famous, I want to be free." "You will be, soon. Patricia's filing the appeal next week." Dominique nodded but felt no anticipation. Freedom should have been everything she wanted, but she'd been caged so long that she couldn't remember what it felt like to move through the world without walls. And more than that, she couldn't remember who she'd been before this. The woman who'd loved Jacob Mescal, who'd believed in truth and justice, who'd thought that being good was enough. That woman was dead, had died in a courtroom while her husband called her dangerous. What would walk out of these prison gates? Dominique didn't know, but she knew it wouldn't be the same person who'd walked in. 3 days later, during morning recreation, a guard pulled Dominique aside. "You have a phone call. Emergency." Dominique's heart stopped. "My mother?" "I don't know, but you need to take it." She followed the guard to the phone bank, her hands shaking as she picked up the receiver. "Dominique." Her father's voice, broken and raw. "Baby girl, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." She knew before he said it. "Mom?" "An hour ago. Peacefully. She was asking for you at the end. Kept saying your name." The phone slipped from Dominique's hands. The guard caught it, spoke into it briefly, then hung up. Dominique didn't cry, didn't scream, just stood there in the middle of the phone bank, other inmates moving around her, life continuing while hers shattered into pieces too small to ever put back together. Rosa found her 20 minutes later, still standing in the same spot. "Come on," Rosa said gently, taking her arm. "Let's get you back to the cell." Dominique let herself be led. Let Rosa help her onto her bunk. Lay there staring at nothing while the world outside these walls continued turning without her mother in it. That night in the darkness, she finally whispered the words that had been building inside her for a year. "I'm going to destroy him." Rosa didn't respond, didn't need to. They both knew exactly who she meant. Chapter 7. The day the cage opened. Dominique Harris walked out of prison after serving 13 months when her conviction was overturned. The same day Jacob Mescal realized that freedom and forgiveness were two different things, and he'd never have the second. The paperwork had moved quickly once Patricia filed the appeal. Anya Joy's perjury was so blatant, the evidence so overwhelming, that the judge had no choice but to vacate Dominique's conviction immediately. No retrial, no conditions, just a signature on paper that said the past 13 months had been a mistake. As if 13 months of hell could be erased with ink. Dominique walked out the prison gates at 7 in the morning, carrying nothing but a plastic bag with the few belongings she'd accumulated. The clothes she'd been arrested in hung loose on her now. She'd lost 20 pounds, gained muscle, become someone physically unrecognizable from the woman who'd entered. Simone was waiting by the car, along with their father. No press, thank God. Patricia had managed to keep the release time quiet, giving Dominique a few hours before the media circus began. "Hey," Simone said softly, pulling Dominique into a tight hug. Dominique stood rigid in her sister's arms, unable to relax into the embrace. Touch felt wrong now, invasive. She'd learned to keep everyone at arm's length, and that instinct didn't disappear just because the walls did. "Where's Mom?" she asked, then remembered. Felt the grief crash over her again, fresh and devastating. "Hospice," her father said quietly. "She's still there. We haven't had the funeral yet. We were waiting." They drove in silence through the city. Everything looked different, brighter, faster, louder. Dominique pressed her hand against the car window, feeling the vibration of movement, trying to convince herself this was real. The hospice was quiet, respectful. Dominique's mother lay in a private room, still and pale, looking smaller than Dominique remembered. She'd lost so much weight during the final weeks. Dominique sat beside the bed and took her mother's cold hand. "I'm here, Mama," she whispered. "I'm out. I'm free." But her mother couldn't hear her, would never hear her again. Dominique sat there for 3 hours, holding that cold hand, talking about everything and nothing, apologizing for not being there, for letting her down, for not being strong enough to stop this nightmare before it consumed everything. "We should start planning the service," her father finally said gently. "Your mother wanted you to speak." Dominique nodded numbly, stood, pressed a kiss to her mother's forehead. "I love you," she whispered, "and I'm going to make sure everyone who hurt us pays. I promise." The funeral was scheduled for 3 days later, small, family only, at the church her mother had attended for 30 years. Jacob showed up anyway. Dominique was standing in the church parking lot greeting family members when she saw him. He looked terrible, gaunt, aged beyond his years, shadows under his eyes like bruises. He was wearing a black suit that hung wrong on his diminished frame. He saw her and froze, then started walking toward her slowly, his hands trembling. "Dominique," he said, his voice breaking on her name. "Please, I need to talk to you. I need to explain." "You need to leave." Her voice was ice. Simone appeared at her shoulder immediately, along with their father. "I didn't know," Jacob continued, tears streaming down his face now. "I swear I didn't know what she did. I believed her lies. I thought you actually hurt her. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. My mother died calling your name," Dominique said quietly, and every word was a knife. "Not because she forgave you, because she wanted to curse you herself but couldn't speak anymore. She died hating you for what you did to me, for what you stole from us." Jacob's face crumpled. "Please, just let me." "She died alone in hospice while I was locked in a cage because of you. I wasn't there when she needed me most. I couldn't hold her hand or comfort her or tell her I loved her one last time, because you put me in prison based on lies. I didn't know they were lies. You should have known." Dominique's voice rose, all the rage she'd been containing for 13 months finally breaking free. "I was your wife, 12 years. You should have known I was incapable of what she accused me of. You should have trusted me, but you chose her. You chose guilt and manipulation and lies over everything we built together. And now my mother is dead, and I will never forgive you for that. Never." Jacob tried to speak, but Dominique's father stepped forward, placing himself between them. "She asked you to leave," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "You're not welcome here. You've caused enough pain. I just want to explain. There is no explanation that matters. You destroyed my daughter. Now get out before I have you removed." Jacob looked past him to Dominique one more time. She stared back with eyes that held nothing but emptiness. No love, no hate, just void. He turned and walked away, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Inside the church, during the service, Dominique gave the eulogy her mother had requested. She spoke about strength and resilience and love, about how her mother had taught her that surviving wasn't the same as living, but sometimes you had to survive first before you could learn to live again. She didn't mention Jacob, didn't acknowledge him or the past 13 months, refused to let him take up space in this moment that should have been about celebrating her mother. But she felt him there, sitting in the back of the church despite being asked to leave, felt his grief radiating across the pews like waves. After the service, as they were lowering the casket into the ground, Dominique looked up and saw him standing at a distance behind a tree, watching. She turned her back and focused on saying goodbye to her mother. Later, at the reception at her father's house, Patricia Okafor arrived with news. Anya Joy has been arrested. Perjury, evidence tampering, pharmaceutical theft. She's facing serious prison time. Dominique nodded, felt nothing. There's more. Jacob contacted my office. He wants to meet with you. Says he has a statement he wants you to hear. No. Dominique, he's offering to testify about what really happened, to go public with the truth. It could help with your civil case against the state. I said no. Patricia studied her carefully. You're entitled to compensation for wrongful imprisonment. We're talking millions potentially, but we'll need Jacob's testimony to build the strongest case. Then build it without him. I don't want anything from him, not his testimony, not his money, not his apology. Nothing. He's also offering to settle the civil case against him personally, whatever you want. Dominique looked at Patricia with eyes that had learned to see clearly in the dark. What I want, he can never give me. He can't give me back 13 months. Can't give me back my mother's last days. Can't give me back the woman I was before all this. So tell him to keep his money and his guilt. I don't want either. Patricia left with that message, and Dominique went to her old bedroom in her father's house, the room she'd grown up in, that still had her high school track trophies on the shelf, and lay down on the narrow bed. She stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what it felt like to be free. But freedom, she was learning, was more complicated than just walking out of a cage. The walls were gone, but they were still inside her head. Chapter 8. The Woman Who Rose 6 Months Free, and Dominique Harris learned that surviving wasn't the same as living, but building something from ashes was how you proved the fire didn't win. The panic attack started 2 weeks after her release. The first one hit in the grocery store. Too many people, too much noise, too many choices after months of controlled routine. Dominique had dropped her basket and fled to her car, gasping for air that wouldn't come, convinced she was dying. Simone found her 20 minutes later, still hyperventilating in the parking lot. "We're getting you help," Simone had said firmly. "Real help." The therapist's name was Dr. Michaela Chen. She specialized in PTSD and trauma recovery, particularly in formerly incarcerated individuals. She didn't flinch when Dominique described the nightmares, the panic attacks, the way she couldn't let anyone touch her without her skin crawling. "What you experienced was trauma," Dr. Chen explained during their third session. "Your body learned to survive in a threatening environment. Now it doesn't know how to turn off that survival response, even though you're safe." "I don't feel safe," Dominique admitted. "That's normal. We'll work on that." The sessions were twice a week. Grueling. Dr. Chen made Dominique relive everything. The arrest, the trial, Jacob's testimony, the prison, her mother's death. Made her sit with the emotions instead of pushing them away. "You've been trying to freeze yourself," Dr. Chen observed. "Making yourself cold and hard so nothing can hurt you anymore. But that's not healing. That's just survival." "What's wrong with survival?" "Nothing. It kept you alive. But now you need to do more than survive. You need to live." Living meant other things too. Dominique moved into a small apartment, couldn't stay with her father or Simone, needed her own space even though she hated being alone. The civil lawsuit against the state moved forward. Patricia was building a strong case, and the state was already talking settlement. Millions of dollars for 13 months of wrongful imprisonment. Blood money, Dominique thought, as if any amount could compensate for what had been stolen, but she accepted it anyway, because she had an idea forming. 3 months after her release, Dominique attended a support group for exonerated prisoners that Dr. Chen had recommended. 12 people sitting in a circle in a church basement, sharing stories of destroyed lives and impossible re-entry. "I can't get a job," a woman named Keisha said. "My record was expunged, but employers still find out somehow. They look at the gap in my resume and ask questions I can't answer. My family treats me differently," an older man added. "Like I'm damaged, broken. They don't say it, but I can see it in their eyes." Dominique sat and listened and saw herself reflected in every story. These people understood, had lived through the same nightmare, were struggling with the same impossible reality of trying to rebuild from ruins. After the meeting, several people approached her. "You're Dominique Harris, right? Your case was in the news." She nodded, uncomfortable with recognition. "What you went through, it's all of our stories, different details, same injustice. Thank you for speaking up about it." An idea crystallized then, not fully formed, but the shape of it becoming clear. The next day, Dominique called Patricia. "I want to start an organization for people like me, wrongfully convicted people who are trying to piece their lives back together. Not legal help, emotional support, re-entry assistance, peer counseling." "That's ambitious." "I know, but the settlement money is sitting there, and I need to do something with it, something that matters." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You'd be good at this. You have a counseling background. You understand trauma. You've lived through exactly what they're experiencing. Will you help me set it up? The legal structure, non-profit status, all of that?" "Of course." They called it second verdict. Not legal aid. There were already organizations for that. This was different. This was about healing. The first meeting was in a church basement, just like the support group. 15 people showed up. Dominique stood in front of them, nervous in a way she hadn't been in prison. "I'm Dominique Harris," she began. 13 months ago, I was convicted of a crime I didn't commit based on perjured testimony from my husband's mistress. I served over a year before my conviction was overturned. When I got out, I didn't know how to function. Had panic attacks in grocery stores. Couldn't let anyone touch me. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't trust. Couldn't see a future past the next hour." Heads nodded around the circle. "I'm still figuring it out. Still in therapy. Still having nightmares. But I'm here. And you're here. And that means something. It means we survived. Now we're going to learn how to do more than that." The organization grew slowly. Word of mouth mostly. People helping other people. Dominique used her counseling skills to facilitate group sessions, brought in lawyers to help with expungement paperwork, connected people to job training programs, created a network of support that didn't exist anywhere else. 6 months in, they'd helped 53 people. Dominique felt the weight of it, every story, every trauma, every person trying to rebuild. But she also felt purpose for the first time since the arrest. This mattered. This was something Anya Joy's lies couldn't touch, something Jacob's betrayal couldn't destroy. It was hers. One evening, after a particularly emotional group session, a man approached Dominique as she was packing up chairs. "I just wanted to say thank you. What you're building here, it saved my life, literally. I was planning to end it before I found this group." Dominique hugged him carefully, still uncomfortable with touch but learning. "I'm glad you're here." After everyone left, she sat alone in the empty church basement, looking at the circle of chairs, thinking about all the broken people who'd sat in them and found pieces of themselves. Her phone buzzed. A text from Simone. Jacob showed up at Dad's house again. Dad sent him away. He left a letter. Should I burn it? Dominique stared at the message for a long moment. Thought about Jacob, still trying to reach her after all these months. Still desperate for something. Forgiveness, absolution, closure. She texted back, "Keep it, don't read it, just keep it." She didn't know why. Maybe someday she'd want to read his words, to understand what he'd been thinking, or maybe she'd burn it herself. But not yet. That night, as Dominique was leaving the church, she nearly collided with someone coming up the steps. "Sorry," he said, stepping back quickly. "My fault." She moved to go around him. "Wait, are you Dominique Harris?" She tensed, wary of recognition. "Yes. I'm Leonard Shaw. I teach at Jefferson High. I've been following your organization's work. I wondered if you might need volunteers for your workshops. I have experience with at-risk youth and trauma-informed education." Dominique studied him. He was around her age, soft-spoken, kind eyes, patient demeanor, the kind of person who waited for her response without pushing. "We could use help," she said carefully, "especially with the younger participants. Come to our next meeting. We'll talk." He smiled. "I'd like that." As she walked to her car, Dominique felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest. Not quite hope, not quite trust, but maybe the possibility of both. Maybe healing looked like this, small steps toward believing in people again. Maybe freedom looked like this, choosing to build instead of destroy. She drove home through the city lights, past the grocery store where she'd had her first panic attack, past the courthouse where her life had shattered, past the apartment she'd shared with Jacob that now held strangers. And for the first time in 13 months, she thought about tomorrow without dread. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. 1 year after her release, Dominique Harris finally faced Jacob Mescal again, not because he deserved her words, but because she needed to say them to be free. Leonard Shaw had become a regular part of Dominique's life in the careful, patient way she needed. He volunteered at Second Verdict every week, helped facilitate workshops, never pushed for more than she could give, never asked for her trauma, never demanded her trust, never made her feel like she owed him anything for his kindness. They'd had coffee twice, dinner once, always in public places where Dominique felt safe, where she could leave if the panic became too much. "I like you," he'd said after their third dinner, his voice steady and honest. "But I can see you're still healing, so I'm not going anywhere. Take whatever time you need, a month, a year, 10 years, I'll be here." That kind of patience was foreign to Dominique. Jacob had been all intensity and grand gestures, passion that burned hot and fast and ultimately consumed everything in its path, leaving only ashes. Leonard was different, steady, solid, like bedrock under shifting sand, like an anchor in a storm she was still learning to weather. She'd kissed him goodnight after that dinner, brief, tentative, terrified. He'd smiled and squeezed her hand and walked away without asking for more, without making her feel guilty for not being ready, without making her broken pieces feel like a burden. In therapy, Dr. Chen called this progress. You're learning to trust again, learning that not everyone will hurt you, that vulnerability doesn't always lead to destruction. It's exhausting. Healing usually is, but you're doing it. That takes courage. Second Verdict had grown beyond Dominique's wildest expectations. They now had 75 regular participants, a small staff of 3 paid employees, and enough donated funds to lease an actual office space instead of meeting in church basements. Local media had picked up their story. Dominique had been interviewed twice, speaking carefully about wrongful convictions and re-entry challenges without dwelling on her own case, keeping the focus on the women she was helping rather than the woman she'd been. She was building a life, imperfect, complicated, still shadowed by trauma that woke her screaming some nights, but real, tangible, hers. And then Jacob showed up at the office. Dominique was working late, reviewing grant applications with reading glasses perched on her nose when she heard the front door open. They usually kept it locked after hours, but one of the staff must have forgotten. She looked up, expecting to see Leonard, who sometimes brought her dinner when she worked late. Instead, Jacob Mescal stood in the doorway. He looked even worse than at the funeral, thinner, older, haunted, like he'd been hollowed out from the inside, and what remained was just a shell going through the motions of living. His suit hung wrong on his diminished frame. His hair was graying at the temples. His eyes had the look of a man who hadn't slept properly in months, maybe years. "Please don't call the police," he said quickly, his voice hoarse. I just need 10 minutes, then I'll leave and never bother you again. I promise, I swear. Dominique's hand moved toward her phone, hovering over the emergency contact she'd programmed for exactly this scenario, then stopped. She looked at this man who'd once been everything to her, who'd once made her believe in forever. This stranger who wore her husband's face, but was someone she didn't recognize anymore. 5 minutes, she said coldly, her voice like ice. Then I'm calling security. He nodded gratefully, stepping inside but keeping his distance, hands visible and open, non-threatening. He'd learned something about trauma responses at least. Had probably been told by his therapist, because of course he had a therapist now. Everyone had therapists after they destroyed lives. I've been in therapy, he said, as if reading her thoughts. Twice a week for the past year. My therapist says I need to take accountability, not just say I'm sorry, but really understand what I did. Actually comprehend the magnitude of the harm I caused. To you, to us, to everything. Good for you. Dominique's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I destroyed you. I know that. I stood in that courtroom and testified against you, and I sent you to prison for something you didn't do. His voice cracked. My wife. The woman who'd been nothing but good to me for 12 years. The woman who loved me when I didn't deserve it. I betrayed you in the worst possible way a person can betray another human being. Yes, you did. I was scared and guilty and manipulated, but none of that excuses what I did. Nothing excuses it. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face unchecked. I made a choice. I chose to believe her over you. I chose my comfort over your truth. I chose cowardice over loyalty, over love, over everything we built together. Dominique said nothing, just watched him struggle with words that meant nothing to her, that couldn't undo 13 months in a cage, that couldn't bring back her mother, that couldn't restore the woman she'd been. I lost everything, he continued, his voice breaking. My business collapsed. Devon ended our partnership. My parents died while you were. They died thinking I was a monster. And they were right. Anya is in prison and I hope she stays there forever. She destroyed both of us. But I let her. I helped her. He took a shaky breath. I have nothing now. No money, no career, no family, no friends, no future. I work retail, stock shelves at a grocery store at night. Live in a studio apartment with cockroaches and broken heating. I spend my nights replaying everything I destroyed, everything I threw away. Am I supposed to feel sorry for you? No. God, no. I don't want your pity. He shook his head violently. I needed you to know that I understand now, that I spend every single day living with what I did, that there's no punishment the state could give me that's worse than knowing I destroyed the best thing I ever had, the best person I ever knew, for a lie, for nothing. Dominique stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor, walked around the desk until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to see the grey in his stubble, the red veins in his eyes, the way his hands trembled. He flinched, as if expecting her to hit him, maybe hoping for it. Physical pain would be easier than this, than having to stand here and face what he'd done without any barrier between them. She wouldn't give him that, wouldn't touch him at all. He didn't deserve even her anger's touch. You want me to know you're suffering, she said quietly, each word precisely placed like a scalpel cutting through flesh. Good, suffer. Spend the rest of your pathetic life knowing what you did. But don't come here asking for forgiveness. Don't show up expecting closure or absolution or whatever your therapist told you that you need to heal, because I will never give it to you, ever. I know. I'm not finished. Her voice turned to steel. You testified that I was dangerous, unstable, violent. You looked a jury in the eyes and lied about the woman you'd promised to love and protect. You sent me to prison where I was strip-searched and humiliated and had panic attacks that made me think I was dying, where I couldn't be with my mother when she needed me most, where I had to become someone hard and cold just to survive each day without breaking completely. Tears streamed down Jacob's face, but he didn't interrupt, didn't try to defend himself. Just stood there and took it, and maybe that was the only decent thing he'd done in 2 years. I lost 13 months of my life, lost my mother's last days. I wasn't there when she died, Jacob. I couldn't hold her hand, couldn't tell her I loved her one more time, because of you. Lost my career that I'd built over a decade, lost my ability to trust anyone, lost the woman I was, that soft, hopeful woman who believed in love and fairness and justice. You killed her as surely as if you'd put a gun to her head. I know. I'm so sorry. And you want me to know you're suffering. You want me to understand that you're hurting. She stepped even closer, making sure he understood every single word. I don't care about your apology. I don't care about your guilt, or your therapy, or your suffering, or your redemption arc. You're irrelevant to me now. You're nothing. Not even worth my hatred anymore. You're just empty space where a person used to be. She stepped back, creating distance again. I'm going to live an incredible life. I'm going to help hundreds of people rebuild from the ruins of wrongful conviction. I'm going to love again, trust again, find happiness again with people who deserve it. And you'll never be part of any of it. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering what I'm doing, how I am, if I ever think about you. And the answer will always be no. I don't think about you. You don't matter enough to occupy space in my mind anymore. Jacob broke completely, dropped to his knees right there on her office floor, sobbing, trying to speak through gasps that sounded like he was drowning. Dominique, please, I can't, please, get up. I can't breathe. Get up. She stepped back, her voice hard as concrete. Don't you dare make me watch you break down. Don't you dare put that on me. You don't get to make me comfort you or feel sorry for you or give you any kind of emotional response. You get nothing from me. Nothing. Ever. Not my forgiveness, not my pity, not even my anger. Just nothing. He struggled to his feet, wiping his face with shaking hands, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Your 5 minutes are up. Leave. Can I just ask one thing? Just one question? No. Please. Just one. Then I'll go. I'll never contact you again, I swear. Dominique crossed her arms, waited. Every second he stood there was agony, and she wanted him to feel it. Do you ever think about what we had? His voice was barely a whisper. The good times, the life we built. Do you ever remember the people we were before this all fell apart? Before I destroyed everything? She looked at him for a long moment. Thought about the beach where he proposed, her feet in the sand, sunset painting everything gold. The kitchen where they slow danced at midnight. The lazy Sunday mornings making breakfast together. The plans they'd made for children, for growing old together, for forever. No, she lied, and felt nothing. That person never existed. You wore a mask for 12 years and I was too stupid to see through it, too trusting, too in love with a fantasy. Now I see clearly, and what I see is a coward who destroyed everything good in his life because he couldn't face his own guilt. A weak man who blamed everyone but himself. A child in a man's body who thought love meant never having to face consequences. Jacob nodded slowly, something breaking behind his eyes. I understand. No, you don't. You'll never understand. But maybe spending the rest of your life trying to will be punishment enough? He started toward the door, his movements mechanical, defeated, stopped with his hand on the handle, his back to her. I hope you find happiness, he said softly, his voice breaking. I really do. I know I don't have the right to hope for anything for you, but you deserve everything good in this world. Everything I couldn't give you. Everything I took from you. I know I do. That's why I stopped waiting for it to come from you. He left. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that sounded final. Dominique stood alone in her office, breathing hard, her hands shaking with adrenaline, her heart pounding against her ribs. She'd expected to feel triumphant, powerful, free, vindicated. Instead, she felt tired, just incredibly bone-deep tired, and empty, like she'd just performed surgery on herself, cutting out the last piece of Jacob Mescal that had been lodged in her chest like shrapnel, and now there was just a clean wound that would finally be able to heal. She called Leonard. "Can you come over?" she asked when he answered, her voice shaking. I need someone here. I need you here. Is that okay? I'm on my way." He arrived 20 minutes later with Thai takeout and questions he was smart enough not to ask. Just held the food while she unlocked her apartment, followed her inside, waited while she changed into comfortable clothes. They ate in companionable silence on her couch, and when Dominique started crying, finally, after a year of holding everything inside, after months of being strong for everyone else, he held her and let her break down without trying to fix anything. "I hate him," she sobbed into Leonard's shoulder, her fingers clutching his shirt. "And I hate that I still feel anything at all. I want to be empty when I think about him, but I'm not. I'm full of rage and grief and this terrible sadness for everything that could have been, for the life we planned, for the children we'll never have, for the love that was real once. I know it was real before he destroyed it." "That's okay. You're allowed to feel all of that, all of it at once." "When does it stop hurting?" "I don't know, but it does get easier. The sharp edges dull, and you're not alone while you figure it out. I promise you that." Later, after Leonard left with a kiss on her forehead and a reminder that she could call him any time, 3 a.m., noon, whenever, Dominique sat on her couch and pulled out her phone. Scrolled through old photos she'd never been able to delete, stored in a hidden folder she only looked at on her worst nights. Her and Jacob at their wedding, looking so young and hopeful, on vacation in Maine, laughing on a rocky beach, making dinner together in their kitchen, his arms around her waist, looking happy, looking in love. Had they been happy? Or had she just been fooling herself all along, seeing what she wanted to see? She'd never know for sure, but she knew this, that life was over. That version of herself was gone, buried in a grave beside her mother. And maybe that was okay. Maybe that was necessary. Maybe you had to lose who you were before you could become who you needed to be. She deleted the photos, all of them, years of memories erased in minutes, the phone asking, "Are you sure?" 3 times before finally letting them go. Then she opened a new document and started writing. Not about Jacob, not about the trial or prison or betrayal or revenge, about the women at second verdict, about their strength and resilience, and the way they helped each other survive impossible things, about how people could live through the unsurvivable and still find ways to build lives worth living, about healing that wasn't linear, about progress that looked like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, about the courage it took to wake up every morning and choose to try again. She wrote until 3 in the morning, words flowing out of her like a dam had broken. When she finally stopped, she had the outline for a book, not a revenge story, not a victim's tale, not even really about her, a survival guide, a roadmap for women climbing out of hell. She sent the outline to Patricia with a note. "Think anyone would want to read this?" Patricia responded within an hour. Apparently lawyers didn't sleep either. "Publishers will fight over this. When can you have a draft?" Dominique smiled, really smiled, for the first time in as long as she could remember. She was going to tell her story, on her terms, in her own words, and make sure every woman who needed it could find a way forward. And Jacob Mescal wouldn't be the villain of this story. He'd be what he deserved to be. A footnote, a cautionary tale about weak men and the strong women who survived them and built empires from the ashes. Nothing more. Chapter 10. The Woman Who Bloomed. 2 years after walking out of prison, Dominique Harris stood at her non-profit's fundraiser gala, surrounded by women she'd helped save, and realized that some endings are actually beginnings, and some losses make room for miracles. The ballroom was full of people, donors in expensive suits, volunteers who'd given countless hours, survivors who'd rebuilt their lives from nothing, journalists covering the event because Second Verdict had become the kind of story people needed to hear. 300 people, all here because of something she'd built from rage and grief and determination. Second verdict had grown beyond anything Dominique had imagined 2 years ago when she'd sat in a church basement with 15 broken people. 3 chapters across the state now, with a 4th opening next month in Portland. Over 200 people helped, some freed from wrongful convictions, others learning to navigate life after exoneration, all of them finding community in a system designed to isolate. Legislation influenced by their advocacy work, their testimonies before state committees, their refusal to stay quiet about injustice. Her book, Second Verdict, Surviving Injustice and Rebuilding Life, had spent 12 weeks on bestseller lists, and all proceeds went directly to the organization. She'd done a book tour, given lectures at law schools, been interviewed on national news programs, become the face of a movement she'd never intended to start. Dominique stood at the podium in a deep purple dress that made her feel powerful, her natural hair in elegant locks that had taken 2 years to grow, looking out at the crowd. Leonard sat at the front table, his hand resting protectively on her chair. On her left hand, barely noticeable unless you knew to look, was a simple engagement ring, white gold with a small sapphire that caught the light. He'd proposed 3 months ago on a quiet Sunday morning in their kitchen. No grand gestures, just, "I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." She'd said yes after a week of careful consideration. Not because she doubted him, Leonard had proven himself 1,000 times over, but because she needed to be sure she was choosing him for the right reasons, not just choosing safety over solitude, not just choosing to be loved over being alone. She needed to know she was whole enough to choose partnership instead of needing it to feel complete. 2 years ago, Dominique began, her voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to crack it. I walked out of prison after serving 13 months for a crime I didn't commit. I was broken, traumatized, convinced I'd never trust anyone again, never feel safe in my own skin, never heal from what had been done to me by people who were supposed to love me. The room was silent, 300 people holding their breath. I was wrong about some of that. I did heal, not completely, maybe never completely, but enough. Enough to stand here without panic trying to claw its way out of my throat. Enough to help others navigate the darkness I barely survived. Enough to believe in a future that doesn't look like my past, that isn't defined by what was taken from me. She saw Simone in the crowd, sitting with their father, both of them smiling with tears streaming down their faces, proud in a way that made Dominique's chest tight. What I learned in those 13 months, and in the 2 years since, is that survival isn't the victory. Survival is just the beginning. The real victory is what you build after the world destroys you, the life you create from ruins, the way you help others even while you're still healing yourself, the choice to keep going when everything in you wants to give up. She paused, let the words settle. I spent 13 months in a cage, but the real prison was in my head, the belief that what happened to me defined who I was, that being a victim was the only identity I'd ever have again, that the woman I'd been before was gone forever and nothing good could ever come after. In the back of the room, barely visible in the shadows, a figure slipped out the door. Dominique caught the movement, recognized the shape even from this distance. Jacob. He'd been at every public event she'd had for the past year, standing in the back, never approaching, never trying to speak to her, just watching, like a ghost haunting the edges of a life he could no longer touch, no longer be part of. Some part of him needed to see that she'd survived. Maybe it made his guilt easier. Maybe it made it worse. She used to let it bother her. Now she barely noticed. I want to thank everyone here tonight, she continued, pulling her focus back to the people who mattered. Every volunteer who gave their time when they could have been anywhere else. Every donor who believed in what we're building and put money behind that belief, and especially every survivor who trusted us with their story, who let us walk beside them as they rebuilt, who proved every single day that the justice system doesn't get to define who we are. The applause was warm, genuine, lasting. After the speech, people lined up to talk to her, to share their own stories, to thank her with tears in their eyes and trembling voices. A woman who'd been exonerated after 19 years. A man whose conviction was overturned last month. A mother who'd lost custody of her children because of a wrongful conviction and was finally getting them back. These were the victories that mattered. These were the stories that made everything worthwhile. Dominique moved through the crowd with Leonard at her side, his quiet presence grounding her when the attention became overwhelming, when the flashbulbs made her think of the courthouse, when too many people standing too close made her skin crawl with the memory of prison. Later, in the car heading home, Leonard squeezed her hand. "You were incredible tonight. I'm so proud of you." "I was terrified the entire time." "Didn't show. You looked like you were born to stand on that stage." Dominique leaned her head against his shoulder, exhausted in the way that felt good, productive, the kind of tired that came from building something instead of destroying yourself. "Did you see him? In the back?" "Jacob? Yeah. Should I have had security remove him?" "No. Let him watch. Let him see what I built without him, what I became after he tried to destroy me. Let him live with that." They drove in comfortable silence through city streets she'd learned to navigate again, past places that used to trigger panic attacks and now were just buildings. Over the past year, Dominique had learned that Leonard understood her in ways Jacob never had, never could have. He knew when she needed space and when she needed presence, knew how to comfort her through nightmares without making her feel weak for having them. Knew that healing wasn't linear, wasn't neat, wasn't something you could rush or force. At home, their home now, a small house with a garden that Dominique was slowly learning to tend, with a second bedroom they were carefully preparing, they found a letter on the doorstep. Dominique knew Jacob's handwriting immediately, knew the slope of his letters, the way he crossed his T's, the specific brand of expensive paper he'd always preferred. "Should I throw it away?" Leonard asked, his voice carefully neutral. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands. "No, I'll read it. Last time." Inside, curled up on the couch with Leonard's arm around her shoulders, she opened the envelope carefully. The letter was short, no dramatic declarations or desperate pleas, just simple words written in shaking handwriting. "Dominique, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to take up space in your life even for these few moments, even just the time it takes to read this and throw it away. I came to the gala tonight not to disrupt or upset you, but because I needed to see that you're okay. That you survived what I did to you, that my actions didn't destroy you permanently. You were magnificent, powerful, everything I always knew you could be, everything I tried to dim with my weakness and cowardice. I'm so sorry I tried to make you small. I'm so sorry for everything, for the lies, for the testimony, for choosing guilt over love, for being too weak to trust you when it mattered most, for letting you lose your mother, your freedom, your peace, for stealing 13 months you'll never get back, for killing the woman you were and forcing you to become someone harder. I won't contact you again, I promise. This is goodbye. I just needed you to know that somewhere in this city there's a man who will spend the rest of his life regretting what he destroyed, but also grateful, and I know I don't deserve to feel gratitude for anything about this, that you thrived despite me, that you built something beautiful from the ashes I left. Be happy. Please be happy. You deserve everything good in this world. Jacob." Dominique read it twice, then handed it to Leonard, who read it silently, his jaw tightening with anger. He kept controlled for her sake. "What do you want to do with it?" he asked quietly. She thought about it, about Jacob somewhere in this city, working his retail job, living his small life, carrying the weight of what he'd done like chains he could never remove, about the man he'd been when they married, full of promises and potential, about the man he'd become, broken by his own choices. She thought about the woman she'd been, the one who'd loved him with everything she had, who'd believed in forever, who'd been destroyed by his betrayal and had to rebuild herself, cell by cell, day by day, breath by breath. That woman would have wanted him to suffer more, would have wanted revenge that cut deeper than prison or poverty or guilt, would have wanted him to feel every ounce of pain he'd caused, multiplied and reflected back. But the woman she was now, the one who'd survived and healed and built something beautiful from ashes. She just wanted him gone, erased, irrelevant. "I'm going to throw it away," she said, standing up. "And then I'm going to make dinner with my fiancé and plan our wedding and not think about Jacob Mescal for the rest of the night, or ever again if I can help it." Leonard smiled, following her to the kitchen. "That sounds perfect. What are you in the mood for?" "Something that takes time, something we can make together, something normal." "Normal is good." She threw the letter in the trash without ceremony, washed her hands like she was washing away the past, started pulling ingredients from the fridge, vegetables, chicken, herbs from the garden she'd been slowly nursing to life. "Oh," she said casually, as Leonard was chopping onions, tears streaming down his face from the fumes. "I got the ultrasound results back today." He stopped mid-chop, the knife frozen in his hand, turned to look at her with eyes wide. "And?" "Everything looks perfect. Strong heartbeat. Due date is in March, right around spring." She was 4 months pregnant, a miracle after everything her body had been through, after months of worrying that the stress and trauma had permanently damaged something inside her. They'd been trying for 6 months, and she'd almost given up hope. Had started to believe that even this, the chance to be a mother, to create life, to build a family, had been stolen from her. But here it was. Proof that her body could still create instead of just survive, that new life could grow in soil that had been scorched. Leonard crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms carefully, reverently, like she was made of something precious. "We're having a baby," he whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "We're having a baby," she confirmed, letting herself sink into his embrace, letting herself feel safe and loved and hopeful. Later, lying in bed with Leonard's hand on her barely there bump, Dominique thought about the life growing inside her, about how 2 years ago she'd been in a cage, believing she'd never have a family, never trust anyone enough to be vulnerable again, never heal enough to let someone love her. And now she was here, engaged to a good man who saw her scars and loved her anyway, building an organization that mattered, that changed lives, that proved something good could come from something terrible. Writing a second book about healing after trauma, creating a future that looked nothing like her past. She thought about Jacob one last time, about him somewhere in this same city, alone, living with his choices, watching her thrive from a distance and knowing he'd never be part of it. She didn't wish him harm, didn't wish him happiness either. She simply wished him irrelevant, which he was. "What are you thinking about?" Leonard asked sleepily, his fingers tracing gentle circles on her stomach. "The future," she said. "Baby names. Whether we should paint the spare room green or yellow. How to childproof the house. Whether your mother will cry when we tell her she's going to be a grandmother. Normal things. Beautiful things. Normal is incredibly good. Normal is everything I never thought I'd have again." She closed her eyes and let herself imagine it, teaching her child about resilience, about rebuilding after devastation, about how strength isn't about never breaking, it's about what you do after you've been shattered, about how love means trusting even when trust is terrifying, about how the world will try to define you by what's been done to you, but you get to write your own story anyway. Her child would know their mother's story, would understand that she'd been wrongfully imprisoned, that she'd lost everything and rebuilt anyway, that she'd survived what should have destroyed her. But they wouldn't know Jacob, wouldn't know his name or his face or his role in any of it. He would be erased from the narrative, a blank space where a husband should have been, a footnote that didn't make it into the final draft. That felt like justice. Not the kind that came from courts or revenge, the kind that came from simply moving forward and refusing to let the past poison the future. The kind that came from building a life so full of love and purpose that there was no room left for bitterness. Dominique Harris had been sentenced to 2 years in prison for a crime she didn't commit. She'd served 13 months before her conviction was overturned. She'd lost her mother, her career, her sense of safety, her ability to trust, the woman she'd been before. Jacob Mescal had testified against his innocent wife based on lies from his mistress. He'd destroyed a 12-year marriage to absolve himself of guilt for an affair. He'd lost everything in the process: career, family, reputation, future, self-respect. Some people would say they both lost, but only one of them learned how to rebuild. Only one of them found happiness again. Only one of them got a second chance at life and chose to use it helping others survive their own nightmares. Only one of them understood that the opposite of love wasn't hate, it was indifference. The woman who walked into that prison died there, killed by betrayal and injustice and a system that failed her. The woman who walked out was someone new, someone stronger, someone who understood that survival was just the first step, and that the real victory was learning to live again after you'd been taught that living was dangerous. And Dominique had finally completely reached indifference, which meant she was free. Not because courts declared her innocent, not because her conviction was overturned, not even because Anya Joy was in prison and Jacob Mescal was destroyed, but because she chose to be. Every single day she chose freedom over bitterness, chose healing over revenge, chose building instead of burning, chose life over the grave they'd tried to put her in. That was the real victory. That was the story worth telling. And somewhere in the darkness of a small apartment across the city, Jacob Mescal knew it too, knew he'd destroyed the best thing he'd ever had and received exactly what he deserved, a lifetime of knowing what he'd lost, what he'd thrown away, what he could never get back. While Dominique Harris slept peacefully in a home filled with love, carrying new life, dreaming of a future bright with possibility. The end.